You think house arrest is bad? Our punishments now are nowhere near as bad as any from the past. Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. I'm your host Emily, and today we're counting down our list of the top 10 worst punishments in ancient China throughout history. Now, for some backstory, the ancient Chinese didn't believe in the idea of defense, meaning there was no prosecution, no defense lawyers, and no jury. Each town would have what is known as yamen, or an office building where an imperial magistrate would exact his punishment on criminals. The process was straightforward, primarily involving a witness presenting their evidence to the magistrate and giving his verdict. An appeal system did exist, but officials did not intend to prove innocence or guilt. Once a magistrate made his determination, they would not change it. So yeah, maybe if you even didn't do the crime, you would still be punished. And these punishments, they make my skin crawl. So let's get into them. Number 10, tattooing. Nowadays, we see tattoos as a way to express ourselves and be creative. We choose what we want it to look like and say, but that's not how it worked in ancient China. One of their punishments was tattooing, permanent markings that were made on the criminal's face or other visible parts of the body, usually words that describe their misdemeanors or location of their exile or hard labor camp. These tattoos permanently and very visibly marked out their crimes for the rest of their lives. So even if you were innocent or served your time, people would know that you were a criminal and what you did. It would follow you for the rest of your life, and you would not be treated well because of it. I feel like this could be more helpful for us nowadays than being put up on a registry like some criminals are put on today, but just imagine one of your biggest mistakes being written out on your skin forever. That's rough. Number 9, rhinotomy. I know what you're thinking, Emily, what is rhinotomy? Well, my friends, rhinotomy is mutilation, usually amputation of the nose. So yeah, they just chop your nose off. And of course, they'd make it the most painful thing ever. You were awake and there was no pain medicine and you were scarred for life, both physically, emotionally, and mentally. But because of blades and bloodletting were involved, rhinotomy often resulted in death because of a tendon infection. I feel like if one of my friends had this happen to them, I would always make a joke, "I got your nose," which they probably wouldn't like. Now, this penalty was heavier than tattooing, and it was a common penalty for officials and soldiers, for instance, if the latter were not able to conquer a besieged city. Occasionally, the punishment of cutting off the nose was combined with other pains. It was later abolished and replaced with the punishment of cutting off the nose by 300 blows with a light stick, which is just as bad. Number 8, Yue. What does Yue mean? Well, it means amputation. Now, there were variations of punishment for different periods where the choice of the foot removed depended on the severity of the crimes committed. Amputation of the right foot for very serious crimes, and the left for lighter offenses. Scientists in Beijing announced the discovery of an almost 3,000-year-old skeleton of a young woman whose foot had been amputated. The finding, say researchers, is rare evidence for the practice of Yue. It is, they say, the earliest archaeological evidence for the practice. Various clues hint that the woman's foot was cut off as Yue. Her bones showed no signs of any disease that could have made such an amputation necessary, and it seemed the injury was roughly made, rather than with the precision of a medical amputation. At the time the woman was living, up to 500 different offenses could result in having a foot amputated, including rebelling, cheating, stealing, and even climbing over certain gates. I can't imagine getting your foot cut off and not even being able to choose which one you lose. If you had to choose, which foot would you prefer to get cut off, left or right? Let me know in the comments down below, and I think I'd go with my left foot. It's the weaker of the two. Number 7, neck tower. The neck tower was a very tall and narrow tower where the offender would be locked inside. The criminal's hands and feet were shackled, and they could only stand on a tower of rocks. Each day, someone removed 1 or 2 stones, and before long, the offender died of strangulation. This is just sick. I couldn't imagine the anxiety that would come along with that. Having to stand for such a long time and just wait to die would be horrible. It would be better if it was done quickly. Also, the addition of public humiliation is another addition to this punishment. Number 6, exile. Exile was a common punishment. Delinquents were sent to remote border regions where they served in military garrisons in compulsory labor or as soldiers. Reports about exile in the wilderness are found in the oldest history books. Criminals were sent up to 1,000 kilometers away and forced to work. Exile could happen if you married someone who was not Chinese, and they also punished thieves in this manner. There were 3 levels of this: 1,000 Lai, 1,500 Lai, and 2,000 Lai, and the period of the sentence ranged from 2 years to 3 years. Now, to understand better, 1,000 Lai is about 500 kilometers and just over 300 miles. Later on, the Tang dynasty extended the distances by 1,000 Lai each, but reduced the time of the exile, with the shortest counting 1 full year of labor, mainly in military garrisons in the borderland. But it was also possible to redeem the penalty of exile by donating copper to the authorities. This was allowed because the state needed copper, so there was essentially a way to get out of it, which I think isn't really fair. Number 5. Cangue. Cangue was a device consisting of a large wooden collar that was placed around the neck of offenders. In addition, the criminal would have to wear the cangue, which varied in weight depending on the severity of their crimes. A list of their past crimes would be attached to the wooden collar most of the time as well. Now, this would be very annoying for sleeping or even trying to put on your clothes. This had several effects. Number 1 was shame. Apart from the obvious sign you've done something wrong, papers noting your crime would be stuck on the boards, making them clear to passerbys. Number 2, pain. Wearing the heavy wooden boards was very uncomfortable. And number 3, hunger. The board was large enough that you couldn't reach your mouth with your hand, so you had to rely on others to feed you. This sounds absolutely terrible. Number 4, death by 1,000 cuts. You know, this isn't just a Taylor Swift song, right? It was a real punishment. This was a long and painful form of execution reserved for the most severe crimes such as treason. The criminal would be tied to a post and authorities would cut incisions on their body. The punishment involved flaying pieces of skin, removing muscles, and even body parts to maximize the pain. The sentence kept the organs functioning and ranged from 8 to 120 cuts. This punishment worked on 3 levels: as a form of public humiliation, as a slow and lingering death, and as a punishment after death. While it's difficult to obtain the accurate details of how the executions took place, they generally consisted of cuts to the arms, legs, and chest, leading to amputation of the limbs, followed by decapitation or stab into the heart. If your crime was less serious or the executioner merciful, the first cut would be to the throat, causing death. Subsequent cuts served solely to dismember the corpse. All I gotta say is, ouch. Number 3, slow drip. Slow drip was a type of torment that was very slow, sometimes painful, and mentally destabilizing. It is a process in which cold water is slowly dripped onto the scalp, forehead, or face for a prolonged period of time. The process causes fear and mental deterioration in the subject. The pattern of the drops is often irregular and the cold sensation jarring, which causes anxiety as the person tries to anticipate the next drip. It's not clear why officials did this, but sometimes the drops would contain acid. The acid would slowly burn through the skin and into the brain, and the victim would eventually go insane. That wasn't all though. The victim would be stripped of their clothes, shown to the public, then be a victim to the torment. They would be driven insane while bystanders watched, mocked, and laughed at them. The victims could see each drop coming, and after a long duration of time were gradually driven frantic to the point of insanity, usually because they were led to believe that a hollow or severe ulcer would develop there, or as sometimes combined, result of a prolonged restraint under irritating conditions, isolation, or the humiliation. Number 2, Gong. Gong sounds fun, but it wasn't. Gong was the act of the permanent removal of a person's reproductive function. Male victims of this punishment were castrated. A very famous casualty was Sima Qian, the emasculated father of the traditional Chinese history writing. Gong punishments for female victims might have involved pounding the woman's abdomen with a stout stick to induce some kind of damage to the womb. Just thinking about this makes me physically ill. It was the second heaviest penalty in ancient China, just after the death death penalty. Indecent behavior in any way was originally the crime to be punished with castration. Later on, rebellion was the main misdoing to apply to this punishment, and it was often combined with collective liability, and whole families were emasculated. Now, I'd be pissed off if my brother did something and I had to face the consequences of it. And coming in at number 1 is death. Now, this wasn't easy like the lethal injection today. Oh no. There were different varieties of death which they could choose from. This included strangulation, decapitation, boiling or grilling a person alive, quartering, cutting the body into 4 pieces, tearing off an offender's head, and attaching them to chariots, execution, then abandonment of the offender's body in the local public market, and making literal mincemeat of a person's flesh and salting it. By the way, other methods of execution were also used, and they couldn't be more gruesome than that. Could they? The cruelty was deliberate and designed to cause maximum pain in the victims and their families, as well as to shock and deter others from committing similar crimes. The most serious punishment was death, and under Tang law there were 144 crimes that were punishable by strangulation and another 89 crimes that were punished by decapitation, so it was common. Well, that's all for our list of the top 10 worst punishments in ancient China throughout history. All I gotta say is I'm glad I wasn't around at that time. I would have had to be on my best behavior 24/7. Which punishment do you think is the worst? Let us know in the comments down below. I'm your host Emily, and I'll see you next time. Peace.